Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Chocolate Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now in this episode, Teagasc Researcher Philip Creighton joins us to give us a monthly update on grassland management. Philip discusses the current growth rates and average farm covers on farms. We discuss building covers and planning that grazing rotation ahead. We also discuss grazing autumn reseeds. Philip highlights deadlines related to the Fertiliser register and slurry and farmyard manure applications. We hear now from Philip.
It's quite farm specific, but if we go back to our last update, we were talking about very strong grass growth in the northwest, west-northwest, and there was a big drought effect down in the southeast. I suppose thankfully rain did come, and I suppose what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, 10 days, I suppose, is that a lot of those farms down in the southeast and south that were under a lot of pressure have started to turn the corner. There's sufficient rain has fell, and covers are starting to respond now. It's probably too late in terms of building big covers, but at least it's getting them out of trouble. So I suppose from that point of view, things have improved. I suppose on the opposite side of it, with the rainfall levels that did come, particularly up in northwest areas again, there's probably grazing conditions have deteriorated quite rapidly in many areas, and that's creating a challenge in terms of grazing heavier covers and getting graze outs. So yeah, look at it, it's a similar split, but different challenges this time around. Growth rates in general are hovering kind of between 40 to 50 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day, which is good for the time of year, I suppose. And depending on stocking rate on farms, demand is probably lower than that on many farms. So there is an opportunity to start building covers now. I suppose in terms of days ahead targets, mid-September we'd be normally saying that we'd be targeting maybe 25 days ahead and looking at some data on pasture base there in terms of the farms that we'd be working with, measuring there. A lot of farms are probably on target, albeit some of the farms that were severely restricted there in terms of growth rates due to lack of rain probably are still behind, but catching up. And as I say, if growth rates remain as they are at the moment, with demand slightly lower, those days ahead figures will continue to climb into that target of about 30 days ahead by early October.
And Philip, just in terms of target opening covers and graze outs, and maybe on that graze out one, just maybe the difficulty in taking some of them heavy covers down, particularly if ground conditions have slipped a little bit.
Yeah, so I suppose look at it when you start building covers and building your days ahead of you. Your pre-grazing yields are going to start rising. So I suppose you're talking about those pre-grazing covers rising to between 15 and 1800 probably as we go through the end of the month into early next month. And in very wet conditions that is going to be a challenge. And I suppose again, all we can do is react to what's in front of us. If there's heavier covers and quite wet conditions, it may be that either allocating smaller areas with temporary fencing, or moving into some of the lighter covers, maybe on drier ground, drier parts of the farm, and coming back to the heavier covers then as things dry out a bit. I think the forecast for the coming week is relatively good, so that will give some reprieve in terms of letting ground soak a little bit, and maybe the opportunity to get back in some of the heavier covers that were maybe not an option at the moment. I suppose the other thing we need to think about at the moment is that as we approach mating now on many of the mid-season flocks, while we still have bigger grazing groups with regard to the ewe flock, is if we could get into some of those heavier covers with a bigger group to start grazing them out, because once we get into mating, on a lot of farms, maybe those numbers of grazing groups are going to be increased, divided down into smaller groups to go to different rams, etc. So it will be easier to try and get some of the heavier covers grazed off, and also planning ahead in terms of what fields are going to be closed first. So if there's heavier covers on fields that you would plan on closing, towards the end of October, trying to get them grazed off now that they're suitable for grazing again by the end of October, to get them cleaned out in a good fashion.
You really have to start thinking 3 weeks to a month ahead now at this stage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Philip, we've kind of covered the grazing management and the setup on it. in terms of the other aspect of grazing probably kicking in a lot of farms this year, we've seen a lot of autumn reseeds going in. Given that the conditions are maybe a bit more difficult, any advice on grazing them or when you should go in and graze them?
Yeah, so there was a fair bit of reseeding done, Kieran. Again, for farms in the west, maybe where there was no conditions allowed to do that the last couple of summers and autumns with the poorer conditions, it was a good opportunity for farms that wanted to do that. I suppose, look, what we would be saying is that definitely in poor conditions, we'd be trying to avoid going into reseeds to where we're going to do damage to the young plants, etc. But again, I suppose it's maybe planning ahead that, if conditions improved and you got a bit of a drier spell, that you'd be in a position to graze them off. I suppose the importance of grazing reseeds to get them to tiller and improve the longer term prospects for the sward. The danger will be, I suppose, if we leave them and miss the next, good grazing opportunity and the weather was to break again, then there may not be another opportunity to get into them. So that's one thing. And then I suppose the whole post-emergent spray for weed control, that window is closing rapidly, I suppose. So again, if that's a job that's still on the list, it could be maybe planned for if we get a dry spell, in the near future.
Certainly taking that opportunity between now and closing that grazer will certainly benefit those swards next year. Philip, just we're talking about closing, we're talking about deadlines. The fertiliser application deadline has passed. Probably a couple of other ones you need to be just conscious of. One is the Fertiliser Register, obviously, and just the slurry and farmyard manure deadlines.
Yeah, so close period for chemical fertiliser is now in effect, so no more chemical fertiliser can be applied. I suppose the exception to that, I suppose, is that K, in the circumstances where there is a requirement for K on, again, based on soil test analysis, that can be applied outside the chemical fertiliser restrictions, but it can only be applied, I suppose, in suitable conditions. So when it's safe to do so and when it's trafficable and no heavy rain forecast. And obviously lime is the same. So lime really should be the starting point for any nutrient management plan in terms of correcting soil fertility, and that can be applied any time as well. And I suppose a good time of year to apply it, albeit that, current conditions, trafficability is not going to be suitable. But if we got the opportunity where it dried out a bit, lime could be considered to be applied as well. I suppose just mentioning the Fertiliser Register, you do need to declare your closing stocks, so you can do that through your ag food, or you can ask your advisor to do that for you. Just to declare if you have stocks of fertiliser still on the farm, you have to declare that. So that has to be done. Slurry. Close period for slurry, I suppose the last day for applying slurry is the 30th of September, and the last day for applying farmyard manure is the 31st of October. So I suppose, again, ideally, if there's a nutrient management plan done and soil test results there available, you could target the areas that are going to respond best to the elevated P and K levels in your slurry and your farmyard manure, to try and target the areas of the farm that are going to need that the most and respond and have that working in for the spring to boost spring grass supply in response to applied fertiliser next spring.
Philip, good having you on. Thanks for that update, and we'll chat to you again next month.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I have included a link in the show notes to the Grass 10 newsletter where you can keep up to date with the regular information from that programme. That's it for me. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.